My mother changed the locks on my childhood home while I was at work. When I showed up around 6 in the evening, all my clothes and important papers were sitting on the front porch in black garbage bags. I stood there on the driveway, holding my car keys, just looking at my entire life thrown out like trash. Before I could even take a step forward, the front door opened. My mother, Helen, walked out with a mug of coffee in her hand. My younger brother, Ethan, was right behind her, leaning against the doorframe with a smug grin on his face. Helen looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ethan is moving in with his fiancée, Chloe, and they need the upstairs space. You're an adult, Annie. It's time for you to find somewhere else to live." I didn't yell. I didn't lose my temper or start begging her to let me stay. I just looked at Ethan, who couldn't even meet my gaze for more than 2 seconds before looking away. Helen really thought she was throwing me out with nothing. What she didn't realize was that without my money over the last 5 years, that house would have been gone a long time ago. I picked up my garbage bags, tossed them into the trunk of my car, and drove away without saying a single word to either of them. I drove straight to a quiet diner 2 blocks away, parked my car, and pulled out my laptop. Helen and Ethan genuinely believed I had been living under that roof for free all these years, but the truth was much dirtier than that. 5 years ago, right after my father passed away, the house was on the verge of foreclosure because he had left behind a heavy reverse mortgage and thousands of dollars in unpaid back taxes. Helen was hysterical back then, crying every night about losing her home, while Ethan was too busy spending his college allowance on parties to care. I was 21, working 2 jobs, and I stepped in to save us. I spent weeks negotiating with the lender, agreed to become an official co-borrower on the refinanced mortgage loan, and took over the monthly payments directly from my account. Helen never asked how the bank magically stopped sending eviction notices, and Ethan just assumed Mom handled it with Dad's non-existent life insurance payout. They built a comfortable fantasy where I was just the quiet older sister taking up a spare room, completely oblivious to the fact that every single tile, roof repair, and mortgage check came directly out of my hard-earned paycheck. Sitting in the diner booth, I opened my banking app and downloaded every statement from the past 60 months, saving them into a secure folder on my cloud drive. My total contribution over those 5 years sat at exactly $112,386. That wasn't just rent money. Every dollar was tracked toward the principal balance, the county property taxes, and the home insurance policy, where I was listed as an additional insured party. After securing all the digital paper trails, I booked a room at an extended stay motel for the week and called my father's old friend, Mr. Vance, who ran a real estate law practice downtown. He picked up on the second ring, and when I told him Helen had locked me out to give my room to Ethan and Chloe, there was a heavy silence on the line. Mr. Vance asked me one simple question: if my name was still on the refinance paperwork from 5 years ago as a co-borrower and title holder. I confirmed it was, and he told me to meet him at his office at 8 tomorrow morning, adding that Helen had just made a legally catastrophic mistake. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Vance's office with a thick folder containing 5 years of bank statements, property tax receipts, and the original loan modification agreement. He reviewed every line carefully, sipping his dark coffee without saying a word for nearly 15 minutes. When he finally looked up, he explained that because I was a registered co-borrower and co-owner on the recorded title, Helen had no legal right to lock me out or treat me as a tenant without a formal court process. Even worse for her, he pointed out that since she and Ethan were attempting to reallocate the property for Ethan's upcoming marriage, they were likely planning to refinance or transfer title rights soon. Mr. Vance warned me that people who lock out co-owners usually try to quietly file paperwork behind their backs to clear the title. He advised that our very first move wouldn't be calling the police to break down the door, but filing a formal notice of lease pendens with the county clerk, effectively freezing any real estate transaction, sale, or mortgage change Helen might try to attempt. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Mr. Vance had officially registered the legal notice with the county courthouse, placing a legal cloud over the property title. Later that evening, my phone buzzed on the motel nightstand with a text from Ethan, asking where I kept the garage key because Chloe's father wanted to park his trailer in the driveway over the weekend. I didn't reply to him, but a few minutes later, Helen called me directly. Her voice was unusually polite, almost overly warm, as she asked if we could talk about clearing out the rest of my old furniture from the attic so Ethan could set up a home office. She casually mentioned that she was having a family dinner on Thursday night to celebrate Ethan and Chloe's official engagement, and she wanted everything settled before Chloe's parents arrived. When I stayed silent, Helen let out a small, patronizing sigh and said she hoped I wasn't holding a grudge over what happened, claiming it was just business and that every family has to prioritize the future generation. She had no idea that while she was planning a dinner party to impress Chloe's wealthy family, the legal trap I laid was about to drop right on her doorstep. Thursday evening arrived, and while Helen was busy laying out her best dinnerware for Chloe's parents, Mr. Vance's office received an alert from the county registry office. Just as Mr. Vance had predicted, Helen had attempted to submit a quitclaim deed 2 days prior, trying to quietly remove my name from the title and transfer half the property ownership directly to Ethan. The clerk's office had flagged and rejected the document immediately due to the active lease pendens order we had placed on the file. Helen had actually believed she could sign a piece of paper at a local notary and erase 5 years of my financial records without my signature or consent. Mr. Vance called to inform me that the rejection notice was officially mailed to the house, arriving right alongside a formal legal demand letter from his firm. The letter demanded full reimbursement of my $112,386 equity contribution, or the immediate partition and court-ordered sale of the property. Knowing the mail had just been delivered, I sat quietly in my car down the street from the house, watching the warm lights inside turn on as Chloe's parents pulled into the driveway. I watched from across the street as Chloe's parents stepped out of their vehicle, carrying a bottle of wine and smiling as Helen greeted them at the front door. Ethan stood behind Helen, dressed in a sharp blazer, playing the part of the successful young homeowner who had his life completely together. Inside, everything looked picture-perfect, but on the small hall table right by the entrance sat the freshly delivered certified mail from the county clerk and Mr. Vance's law firm. Helen had simply set the thick white envelopes aside without opening them, assuming they were routine junk mail or property tax updates to be dealt with later. Halfway through their dinner, as Ethan was explaining his big plans to renovate the back patio for Chloe, a sharp ring echoed from the front doorbell. It wasn't a casual guest. A private process server hired by Mr. Vance had arrived to officially hand-deliver the formal court summons directly into Helen's hands. When Helen answered the door, expecting a late delivery or a neighbor, the server confirmed her full name, handed her the legal packet, and stated clearly in front of the entire hallway that she was being officially served in a real estate title dispute and equity lawsuit. Helen stood in the foyer with the thick legal envelope in her hand, her face completely losing all its color as she read the front cover. Chloe's father, a seasoned commercial real estate developer, noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere and stepped out into the hallway to check if everything was fine. Helen tried to laugh it off awkwardly, claiming it was just some routine administrative mix-up regarding the old home insurance policy, but Chloe's father immediately recognized the red stamp of a county court summons. He took a brief look at the header, saw the words notice of lease pendens along with my name listed as the primary plaintiff and co-owner, and turned back to look at Ethan with a sharp, questioning expression. Ethan tried to interject, stammering that I was just being bitter about moving out and that I had no real claim to their family house. But Chloe's father didn't buy the lie for a single second. He pointed out directly that a bank doesn't list someone as a primary co-borrower or title holder unless they carry the actual financial weight of the mortgage. Within minutes, the warm celebration inside collapsed into awkward silence as Chloe's father quietly asked his daughter to grab her purse so they could leave. Chloe was visibly confused and embarrassed as her father guided her toward the front door, ignoring Ethan's desperate attempts to explain the situation. Before leaving, Chloe's father turned to Ethan in the driveway and told him point-blank that he wouldn't allow his daughter to marry into a situation built on financial deception and unstable property claims. As their car pulled away into the night, Helen slammed the front door shut and immediately dialed my phone, her previous calm composure completely replaced by screaming fury. She accused me of trying to humiliate Ethan in front of his future in-laws and demanded that I withdraw the legal papers before I ruined his entire engagement. I listened quietly on the line until she finished her tirade, without raising my voice or getting defensive. When she finally paused for breath, I told her calmly that she was the one who threw my life into trash bags on the porch to hand the house over to Ethan, and that my lawyer would handle all further communications regarding my $112,386 equity share. I hung up the phone, muted her number, and let the reality of her own actions sink in. The next morning, Ethan tried to call me 4 times from a new, unblocked number, leaving desperate voicemails claiming Chloe had put their wedding planning on hold until he cleared up his legal status. He begged me to come to the house so we could settle things quietly like family, promising that they would give me back my old room if I dropped the lawsuit. I forwarded every single voicemail to Mr. Vance as additional evidence of their admission that I had been wrongfully excluded from the property. Later that afternoon, Helen hired a cheap local attorney who sent Mr. Vance a poorly drafted letter claiming that my monthly contributions over the past 5 years were merely informal family rent and gave me no right to equity or ownership. Mr. Vance responded within 2 hours by attaching certified bank records showing that my payments were transferred directly to the mortgage servicer's loan portal, alongside property tax payments made directly under my legal name. Confronted with undeniable documentary evidence, Helen's lawyer privately advised her that taking this case to a full trial would only result in massive legal fees that she couldn't afford, leaving her with no choice but to face a judge. 3 days later, Mr. Vance informed me that Helen's attorney had reached out to request an emergency settlement conference before the preliminary court hearing. I agreed to meet, but only at Mr. Vance's office, and on the condition that Ethan wasn't allowed in the room. When Helen walked into the conference room with her lawyer, she looked exhausted, the sharp confidence she had on the day she threw my clothes out completely gone. Her lawyer opened the discussion by offering to refund $20,000 over 5 years, claiming that was all Helen could reasonably afford on her fixed income. I didn't say a word, letting Mr. Vance slide a single piece of paper across the table showing our counteroffer: full repayment of $112,386 within 30 days, or we would proceed with the court-ordered public auction of the house. Helen gasped, claiming I was destroying her livelihood and kicking her out on the street, but Mr. Vance reminded her calmly that she was the one who initiated the eviction without a legal basis. He made it clear that if the house went to auction, the bank would take its remaining cut, I would receive my documented equity first, and she would be left with whatever small fraction remained. Helen's lawyer pulled her into the hallway to speak privately, leaving us in the conference room for nearly 20 minutes. When they returned, her lawyer reluctantly stated that Helen was willing to sign a legally binding promissory note to pay back my full equity, provided we gave her 6 months to secure a loan. Mr. Vance immediately rejected the proposal, pointing out that with her income and the active legal encumbrance on the title, no reputable bank would grant her a personal loan without using the house as collateral, which required my signature anyway. Instead, Mr. Vance presented our final non-negotiable term. Helen had 45 days to put the house on the market with an independent real estate broker chosen by us, or we would file for an immediate court-mandated partition sale. Realizing she had run out of delay tactics and legal loopholes, Helen signed the preliminary settlement agreement right there at the table. As she put down the pen, she looked at me with deep resentment and asked how I could do this to my own family. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that family doesn't throw 5 years of sacrifice into garbage bags on a driveway, and then I walked out of the room. 2 days after the settlement agreement was signed, our court-appointed real estate broker placed a for sale sign on the front lawn of the house. Ethan was furious, posting vague messages on social media about ungrateful family members ruining lives, but his online rants did nothing to stop the real estate agent from scheduling open house viewings. Chloe's family officially called off the engagement that same week, leaving Ethan stuck, packing up his belongings from the upstairs room he had fought so hard to steal from me. Helen tried one last desperate move by refusing to allow prospective buyers inside during scheduled viewing hours. But Mr. Vance immediately sent her attorney a formal notice warning that any interference with the court-ordered sale process would result in immediate legal sanctions and contempt charges. With no other choice, Helen had to unlock the doors and stand silently on the sidewalk while strangers toured through her home, inspecting every room. Seeing potential buyers walk through the house made her finally realize that her attempt to quietly strip my rights away had cost her the very roof over her head. Within 10 days of being listed, the house received multiple competitive offers due to the favorable neighborhood market, and we accepted a strong cash bid that was $20,000 above our asking price. The escrow process moved quickly, with the closing date set for 30 days later. Helen and Ethan were forced to sign the final closing documents at separate tables in the title company office, unable to dispute the strict financial breakdown dictated by the court settlement. Out of the total sale proceeds, my full $112,386 equity contribution was wired directly into my personal bank account, along with an additional percentage covering my court costs and legal fees. After paying off the remaining bank mortgage balance, Helen was left with only a small residual check, barely enough to secure a modest two-bedroom apartment on the far side of town. As I walked out of the escrow office into the afternoon sun, my phone buzzed with a bank notification confirming the full deposit in my account. For the first time in 5 years, the heavy financial burden I had carried for an ungrateful family was completely lifted, and my life was finally mine again to rebuild on my own terms. With my money safely transferred to my bank account, I signed a lease on a bright, quiet apartment of my own, far away from the neighborhood where I had spent years being taken for granted. A few weeks after the house sale closed, I ran into an old family friend at a local grocery store who told me that Helen and Ethan had moved into a small rental on the edge of town. Without my financial backup, Ethan had been forced to take a full-time job to help Helen pay her monthly rent, and their constant arguments over money had turned what remained of their bond into bitter silence. Neither Helen nor Ethan ever reached out to apologize, but I no longer needed an apology or their approval to feel whole. Sitting on the balcony of my new home, looking out at the evening skyline, I realized that standing up for myself wasn't about getting revenge. It was about setting a boundary that could never be broken again. I had built my own stability from scratch, brick by brick, and no one would ever be able to put my life into garbage bags again. 6 months passed, and my life settled into a quiet, peaceful rhythm that I hadn't experienced in years. I spent my weekends decorating my new apartment, focusing on my career, and finally putting money aside for my own long-term savings instead of dumping it into a mortgage that wasn't respected. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a message on a professional networking app from Chloe, Ethan's former fiancée. She expressed her sincere apologies for the chaotic scene at the dinner party months ago and admitted that her father had later explained the full legal reality of what Helen and Ethan were trying to pull off. Chloe shared that leaving Ethan was the best decision she ever made, as he had tried to blame everyone but himself for the downfall of his engagement and financial status. I thanked her for her kind message, wishing her well in her future, and closed the laptop with a calm smile. It was a subtle, satisfying reminder that truth always finds its way to the surface, and that walking away from toxic family dynamics had saved not just my hard-earned equity, but my self-respect as well. A year later, I received an unexpected email from Mr. Vance with an attached official court notice marking the final accounting closure of the estate property file, permanently wrapping up all remaining legal ties between Helen, Ethan, and myself. He added a short personal note in the email, congratulating me on standing my ground and mentioning how rarely he sees someone recover every single cent of their stolen equity without giving in to family pressure. Reading his words brought a quiet wave of closure that I didn't even realize I was still waiting for. I took an afternoon walk through the city park near my apartment, breathing in the fresh air without the heavy knot of anxiety that used to sit in my chest every time I pulled into my old driveway. Helen and Ethan were now distant memories from a chapter of my life that was officially closed, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, my future belonged entirely to me, unburdened and built on my own strength. 2 years after the sale of the house, I decided to invest a portion of my saved equity into purchasing a charming, modest condo of my own, signing all the closing papers independently with my name as the sole owner. As the real estate agent handed me the keys on a quiet Friday afternoon, I stood in the empty living room bathed in golden sunlight, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride and peace. My life was entirely stable, built on my own hard work, clear boundaries, and honest efforts. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would mention how Helen still complained to anyone who would listen about how her daughter abandoned her, but those words no longer carried any power or weight over me. I had learned that protecting your peace sometimes means walking away from the people who expect you to sacrifice yourself for their comfort. I placed the keys on the kitchen counter, looked out the window at the peaceful neighborhood below, and knew with complete certainty that I was finally home. As the sun began to set over my new balcony, casting a warm glow across my furnished living room, I felt a deep sense of relief settle into my heart. Looking back at the girl whose life had been packed into black trash bags on a front porch, I realized she wasn't a victim. She was just someone who hadn't yet realized her own strength. The hard lesson of losing my childhood home ultimately gave me something far more valuable: complete control over my own life, absolute independence, and an unshakable belief in my own worth. I picked up my mug of warm tea, sat down in my favorite armchair by the window, and took a slow, deep breath of pure quietness. There were no hidden resentments left to carry, no unpaid sacrifices to weep over, and no toxic family expectations keeping me awake at night. I was safe, secure, and surrounded by the calm life I had built for myself, ready to embrace whatever peaceful chapters were waiting for me ahead. While continuing my daily corporate job, the weight of the legal system I had navigated stayed in the back of my mind, leading me to offer 2 hours every Saturday morning at a quiet community legal clinic downtown. I spent those calm mornings sitting at a wooden desk with young adults, helping them organize bank statements, read through unfair lease contracts, and structure their simple legal paperwork. One Saturday, as I was walking a young tenant to the door after reviewing her security deposit documents, she paused, held her folder tightly to her chest, and said softly, "I thought I was going to lose everything because I didn't know the rules. Thank you for listening to me." Sitting back down at my desk with a warm cup of coffee, I didn't feel like a hero or a public figure. I just felt a quiet, grounding sense of warmth, knowing that my painful years had given me the simple tools to keep someone else's world stable for one more day. A few weeks later, on a slow Tuesday afternoon, my office desk phone rang with a call from a local rental screening agency on the other side of town. The property agent explained in a businesslike tone that Ethan had submitted an apartment application and listed my name as a financial guarantor to bypass his poor credit score. The agent asked directly if I would be willing to sign a legally binding form guaranteeing his monthly rent payments if he defaulted. I looked out the window at the quiet city streets, took a gentle breath, and said politely, "I haven't shared a household or any financial ties with my brother in over 2 years, and I will not be acting as a cosigner on his lease." The agent thanked me for the clear answer, made a small note on the file, and ended the call. Hanging up the receiver without any lingering anger or heartbeat spike, I quietly resumed my work, realizing how natural and effortless my boundaries had finally become. As the seasons shifted, the clinic coordinator asked if I would spend 45 minutes once a month running a simple financial organization workshop for 5 or 6 young adults in our small conference room. We sat around a plain oak table with printed handouts, talking about basic legal rights, title documentation, and how to protect personal savings when family relationships became financially blurred. During one session, a young girl sitting near the edge of the table looked down at her notebook and asked in a barely audible voice, "How do you handle the guilt when people you love call you cold for protecting yourself?" I paused, looked at her kindly, and replied, "Self-respect isn't coldness. It's just the fence that keeps your life safe. You can still wish people well from the other side of that fence without leaving the gate wide open." The room grew still as the small group took in the words, and in that simple moment, I knew that healing didn't require a big audience, just an honest conversation between people who understood the weight of keeping boundaries. On a crisp Saturday afternoon in late autumn, I decided to do some deep seasonal cleaning in my living room, sorting through old boxes I hadn't opened since moving into the condo. At the very bottom of a faded cardboard box, wrapped between old college notebooks, my fingers brushed against a small, silver-framed family photograph from 10 years ago. It showed Helen, Ethan, and me sitting on the front porch of our old childhood house, smiling before money, entitlement, and secret betrayals had torn everything apart. I sat on the hardwood floor for a long moment, looking at my mother's face in the photograph, feeling a faint, dull echo of sadness, not the sharp pain of betrayal, but the gentle grief of accepting that some people only love you as long as you are useful to them. I didn't tear the photo up, and I didn't cry. I simply wiped the dust off the glass, placed it inside a dark wooden memory box, and closed the drawer. Some memories belong in your past, tucked away with respect, but kept far away from the life you are building today. That evening, as the sky faded into a deep dusk, I poured myself a fresh mug of chamomile tea and walked out onto my small balcony overlooking the quiet residential street below. The cool autumn air settled gently around me, carrying the distant sound of rustling leaves and faint city traffic. Looking into my warm, softly lit living room behind me, with its neat furniture, quiet corners, and stable foundation built purely on my own hard work, I felt an absolute, unspoken stillness settle deep into my chest. There were no urgent letters from attorneys waiting on the counter, no toxic family demands draining my bank account, and no expectations to carry anyone else's weight. I took a slow, quiet sip of my tea, leaned gently against the railing, and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one, completely content with the simple, quiet life I had created for myself.